Welcome everyone. This webinar is of course hosted by the Organic Farmers Association. My name's Kate Mendenhall and I'm the Director of Organic Farmers Association. The mission of Organic Farmers Association is to provide a strong and unified national voice for domestic certified organic producers. OFA aims to build and support a farmer-led national organic farmer movement and national policy platform. Today, we are excited to have Patty Lovera, our Policy Director, share her expertise and insight on the election review and what it means for organic. Patty joined Organic Farmers Association in January 2020, and we're so lucky to have her advocating on behalf of organic farmers. Before joining OFA, she co-founded and led program work at Food and Water Watch, where she led much of the organization's work on organic food and farming. She brings an extensive background in grassroots organizing and productive legislative work. As Policy Director at OFA, she supports the elected Organic Farmer-Run Policy Committee. During today's presentation, all attendees will be muted. You're welcome to submit comments through the Q&A feature, which is located at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see it, go ahead and put your cursor over the bottom of your screen, and then some menu boxes should appear and you should see the Q&A button. Feel free to submit written questions, and then we'll have some time at the end to go ahead and ask them. So now we'll go ahead and start the presentation. Patty, thank you.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to do just not a very long presentation. I have like 6 or 8 slides just to kind of keep me in some kind of order. Just to kind of paint the lay of the land of what we know so far from the election. There's still things that we're figuring out, and just to kind of like whet everybody's appetites to think about what that means for how we advocate for organic next year. So Kate talked about who OFA is. I think I recognize a lot of names on this participant list, so I think you all are familiar. And then you're also familiar, if I can get the slides to do something here. There we go. You're also familiar with the fact that we have a really robust process for getting farmers' input about what our policies should be. So, and we've had a lot of continuity over the years. You'll see real common themes between these years from 2018 to 2019 to this year. You know, we really prioritize getting the USDA's National Organic Program to enforce the organic standards so that we have a label with integrity that remains a viable option for organic farmers to find a pathway through a really crowded marketplace. Issues like enforcing the rules to prevent fraud, improving those rules to prevent fraud, dealing with hydroponics. Climate change is another issue that's really risen up over the years. And then yet another example of why we need enforcement is on organic dairy. So these are the things that we kind of use to organize our work as we're dealing on the many, many things the world throws at us that impact organic farmers. We try to keep these priorities in mind about what we're looking at. And this is probably overly simplified, but I think it's worth just taking a second to think about. So if we have those priorities, we want good rules. We want those rules enforced. We know we need a healthy program at USDA to do that enforcement. There's different places in the government we can go to try to get what we want, right? I mean, that's what it boils down to. We need to target our effort in the right place. And so when we, get together and think about what are our plans, how are we going to advocate, we have to think about where. So there's lots of issues that affect farms that you might want to do at the local level, right? Like, what are the local rules? Are there zoning issues? Are they changing the local taxation rate? Like, there's lots of stuff to do at the local level. There's even more to do at the state level. But when we get together as OFA, often we are really focused at that federal level. So we're worried about Congress, particularly the Agriculture and the Appropriations Committee. Appropriations is a fancy word for money, and it's one of Congress's jobs to give the executive branch, the Department of Agriculture, the Pentagon, all of those things that are in that executive branch, they get their money every year from Congress, and that process is called appropriations. So one, we know we need money for those programs to run, but we also can use that process for some leverage, right? Because these agencies are fairly receptive when it's time for them to come get their money for the next year. So we try to use that process to our advantage. And then we also focus in the executive branch, in particular at the Department of Agriculture, there's something called the National Organic Program. They're the ones who are holding the regulations that lie beneath the organic label. They have something that they have an entity that advises them called the National Organic Standards Board that's very unique in the government and has a real specific mandate about how they are supposed to advise the USDA when they're setting those rules. And then there's always, our other branch of government, there's the legal effort, and sometimes that comes into play, and sometimes that's come into play for organic as well. So this probably seems overly simplified, and maybe it doesn't need to be said if we've got pros on the phone today, but it's worth pointing out because you might hear me, if I'm doing my shorthand of what the plan is, I kind of bop back and forth between Congress and the USDA, and then occasionally you'll hear about something in the courts, and that's because they are all interrelated, and we have to keep in mind like who can give us what we want at a particular moment. So what we learned about the election, in particular, in two of those branches, right? It doesn't automatically change things in the courts, but it always does in Congress and in the administration and those executive branch agencies. So probably this is not a real revelation to folks, but sometimes it's worth putting a picture up to show one of the themes you're going to hear about for 2021 is how tight things are in Congress. So we're still waiting. This is as of a week or two ago. There's still a couple states that are super slow in like finalizing their votes. So we don't know the exact numbers, but we know that the House will be controlled by Democrats, but they will control it by a smaller margin than they currently have. And that just changes the dynamics of how much room they have to play with, how aggressive they can be, makes them more reliant on Republican votes. So you're going to hear a lot about just how tight the margins are in the House. We do know a couple of things in those key places where we do a lot of our work. We now know there's steps that have to be taken in January when the new Congress starts, but they've done all the work, the preparatory work that they do now. And so we are virtually guaranteed to see the chair of the House Ag Committee be Representative Scott from Georgia. That is a change. For a long, long time, we had the top Democrat was Colin Peterson from Minnesota, but he lost his election, which was a big deal. So that's a big change to not have Colin Peterson running the Agriculture Committee. We're going to have David Scott from Georgia. He's the first African-American chair of the House Ag Committee. He's already said he wants to rise up that agenda of looking at the civil rights record at USDA, whether Black and other minority farmers have equal access to the programs USDA runs. Like, I think you're going to see a renewed focus at the full committee level on some really overdue issues. So that's going to be very interesting. The top Republican, which is the ranking member, is the top member of the minority party, is also going to be a change. For a long time, the top Republican was Representative Conaway from Texas, but he retired. So we're going to have a new leadership across the board, both Democrat and Republican, and the Republican's going to be Representative Thompson from Pennsylvania. In terms of the Republicans who were next on the list, I think this was the best for organic. Pennsylvania is just as a state with more diversified farms. He's fairly familiar with organic. So we could have done worse for sure on that particular spot. And then we're going to see some turnover on the House Ag Committee. One, there were some members who lost their elections. And two, you just see more turnover in the House, and that's happening right now. So like members of the House are putting in requests to their leadership, whether Republican or Democrat, and saying, I would like to be on this committee and this subcommittee. And we're still waiting for things about what is the ratio. They kind of adjust how many Republicans and Democrats are on the committees based on the strength of the margin. So we're waiting to hear exactly, there'll be this many Democrat seats, this many Republican seats, but we are going to see some new faces on this Ag Committee. That much we know. The other committee we spend a lot of time with is that appropriations process, the money. So we use that because we need the National Organic Program and other parts of USDA to have what they need to function. But we also use that as kind of, not even backdoor anymore. We kind of explicitly use that to try to provide some oversight into how USDA is running. And so you will see us working that process to try to say, we gave you money to do this last year. We gave you a deadline. Did you meet it? And when they come back in the next year, they'll usually have a hearing, and the Appropriations Committee is like, did you meet what your plan last year? Did you do what you say you were going to do? And we're increasingly having to use that process in organic to try to hold USDA's feet to the fire to get things done or get them done on time. So it does matter who's running the Appropriations Committee. There's a change here as well. There was a very long time chair of that committee from New York named Nita Lowy, and she's retiring. So we have a new chair of the full Appropriations Committee, who's going to be Rosa DeLauro from Connecticut. I think that's good news for organic. She doesn't wake up in the morning to think about organic or sustainable agriculture, but she is a critic of kind of big ag. She has done food safety work forever and is very critical of USDA being captured by the big meat companies. So I think she has that ability to be critical of USDA and really think about them. The ranking member, that top Republican, is going to be Representative Granger from Texas. That could be better for us, but it's what it is. We're still waiting to see. There are very important subcommittees in the appropriations world because that's given money to the whole government. There is an agriculture appropriations subcommittee. Right now, the Democrat, the chair of that subcommittee, is Sanford Bishop from Georgia. I kind of expect that to stay the same, but we don't know that yet. That's the kind of stuff that's happening right now. So that's the House. And then in the Senate, it's a little more up in the air. So I'm sure you all have heard about this, right? This is big news. So we are waiting till January 5th. There are 2 senators that had to have a runoff election in Georgia, and they will determine control of the Senate. So right now, we don't know if we're dealing with a Republican Senate or a Democratic Senate. If both those seats in Georgia went to Democrats, you'd have a 50-50 tie, and the tie goes to the party of the president because the vice president comes over to vote on things. So we know who the top people are for each party. We just don't know which one's going to be the chair. So on the Agriculture Committee, Debbie Stabenow will remain the top Democrat, and the top Republican is going to change because we've had Pat Roberts for a long time from Kansas. He is retiring. That's good news for organic. It's time for that to happen. He is not a fan and has not done us any favors. So the top Republican is going to be John Bozeman from Arkansas. And then on that appropriation side, on the money side, we expect that it'll remain the same, which is Senator Leahy from Vermont and Senator Shelby from Alabama. And obviously, Senator Leahy is probably the biggest organic champion we have. Responsible for the USDA program, wrote the law, et cetera, et cetera. So that's been hugely valuable for organic, and it will continue to be. So that's good news. We hope that he's going to keep that. We're not hearing any signs that he's not going to keep that chair. And then for USDA, I'm sure you all have heard this too. So we have a nominee for the Secretary of Agriculture, which is Tom Vilsack, who is a familiar name because he was the Secretary of Agriculture for virtually all of the Obama administration. I think he left a month early. He was one of the few that went 8 years. It's pretty rare for a cabinet secretary to go 8 years. It's also pretty rare to come back, but here we are. They are recycling. So we could have done better. We also could have done worse for organic. So it is what it is. He is the nominee. They seem to be sticking with him. There has been some criticism, but they haven't backed down from their choice. And he seems pretty confirmable by the Senate because he's a known quantity and because lots of Republicans are comfortable with him. So it seems likely we are going to have a Secretary Vilsack. And that really puts a lot of pressure then on the other jobs at the top of USDA, which there's a lot of them. There's a lot of other jobs that are political appointments. And that makes a difference. There's lots of moving parts. It's a massive agency. So the deputy, there's a lot of attention now, a lot of debate about who will get the deputy secretary, which is number 2 at USDA. And when Vilsack was secretary before, under Obama, that was the spot that Kathleen Merrigan had. So there's a lot of people just speculating. I have not seen her say anything concrete. A lot of people speculating, would she come back? Would they want her? Would she want it? Would she want to redo that role as number 2? There's 3 assistant secretaries. There's a lot of talk because the criticism that's coming out of Tom Vilsack is really around his civil rights record performance. So there's an assistant secretary of civil rights. So I think you're going to see a lot more debate than normal about who should get that job. And then there's 8 undersecretaries ranging from, natural resources, which covers the Forest Service, food safety, food and nutrition, which covers SNAP. The one that we care about the most in organic is marketing and regulatory programs. So if you're thinking about the current team at USDA, that's Undersecretary Ibaugh. And then under that, marketing and regulatory programs, one level down is the Agricultural Marketing Service, and there'll be a new administrator of the Agricultural Marketing Service. Sometimes we see somebody who's had that job before stay on, but it is a political appointment. It could change in a Vilsack administration. And then the National Organic Program is under that, under the AMS. And the administrator of the National Organic Program could stay. That is not technically a job that has to change in a new administration. It's more of a career track. And then the other thing I threw up here, just because people think a lot about, oh, there's really good people to, it's time for new blood to get into USDA, but I know so-and-so and they don't want to move to Washington. There are really, USDA has a tremendous reach, especially compared to other federal agencies. They have a lot of people outside DC. So there are state level directors of the Farm Services Agency. There's rural development directors in each state. There's a state conservationist who works with NRCS and is quite important in setting the priorities for conservation programs, for EQIP grants, things like that. So if you know of people who are like, maybe I would think about going into administration, but I'm not going to go to Washington, urge them to get creative, because USDA has people outside Washington too, and we need good people in all of those jobs. And so in terms of, just to give a taste, and then I want to hear what people have questions about or ideas about, or if they're hearing other scuttlebutt, in terms of what we're thinking for OFA with those priorities that we have and like what this election means for them. We know we have plenty of work to do, and we've already communicated that to the Biden transition team. We will communicate that, on day one when there's a new team inside USDA. There's a lot they need to do quite quickly. We have a real comprehensive list of short-term things we need. So, on that enforcement area, there is a rulemaking we're in the middle of. We all commented on the strengthening organic enforcement rule, which was a really major, pretty historic addition to the body of organic regulations. And so we need to finish that up. We're in the proposed rule stage. We all commented, and there's a lot of work to do to take it across the finish line into final rule. And we don't want that to get lost in the shuffle of an administration change. We want them to keep going with that. So that's very high on our list. You all have heard about lots and lots of delays, and this crosses administrations. This is not new to the current bunch, on a really important rule for the dairy sector, the origin of livestock rule. We've had a lot of fits and starts and delays, and so that's on our short list to revive that process and get an enforceable rule about how we transition organic dairy cows across the finish line and get it finished as soon as possible. Also in that livestock arena, this one is interesting because of Vilsack. Very late in the Obama administration, towards the end, they put out a proposal for the organic livestock and poultry. I always add P's, it may not be production, poultry practices rules. There's a lot of P's in that rule, which is an attempt to bring up the floor of what animal welfare standards were for organic animals. It didn't get totally finalized. The Trump administration withdrew it, and now there are actually multiple lawsuits because the Trump administration withdrew those rules. So this is very high on lots of people's lists, OFAs, lots of other organic groups, and it also showed up on the lists of several big animal welfare organizations who think about the food system. They want this back because they saw, that we were close to improving those standards, and then it didn't get done in the Trump administration. And then we need to really keep an eye out and communicate to, the new leadership of USDA that there's a better way to deal with the National Organic Standards Board in terms of who they choose to be on it, how much authority they have to set their work plan, and then taking what they do and actually taking those recommendations from the board and finishing the job and turning them into regulations. So that's all very early stuff that we want them to do as quickly as possible when there's a new team at USDA. When we think about Congress, we have a short-term problem they could help us with, which is, lots of the USDA came up short with money that's available to reimburse organic farmers for their certification costs. And we're hoping for kind of a short-term fix to provide more money to fill the gap, which was USDA's fault because they did bad bookkeeping. The fix to that is in one of those spending bills, those appropriations bills, to put more money in the pot for that program. We are kind of constantly dealing with delay and gridlock. Like this week, Congress is one of the things that's keeping Congress in town to figure that out. And we are hopeful we can get, if they can pass a big spending bill to keep funding the government, we want to have a fix for our cost share program in that vehicle. And that might drag on into next year if they kind of kick the can down the road and do a short-term fix. We might be continuing to do that. The big question, and I think hopefully we have some time for a discussion about that, is there's gonna be lots of talk about some kind of policy action on climate. right? That was, I think, one of the things that came out of this election. If you go look at the Biden transition website, it's one of their 4 priorities for immediate action is, addressing climate. The real question is whether in this Congress that's clearly going to be very tight in terms of control, is Congress the place where we see movement on climate, or is it in that executive branch? And so that is going to be a real hot topic. There's clearly going to be debate in Congress. There are already bills about climate and agriculture now. I expect to see them reintroduced in the new Congress, but I think we're also going to be seeing a lot of conversation about, if Congress gets stuck on this, what can the USDA do? I think you're going to see that in every agency. You're going to see a lot of push of, we can't wait for Congress. We need to go do X, Y, and Z at the USDA. So I think that's going to be a hot topic, and I think OFA has a role to play in that for sure. And then the last 2 things you're going to hear about in Congress is, it's hard to believe I haven't fully recovered from the 2018 Farm Bill, but it's time to talk about the Farm Bill again. We never are really done talking about the Farm Bill. That enforcement rule, strengthening organic enforcement, we're doing that because of something we got in the 2018 Farm Bill, and we're still not finished. We're still writing those rules. We still want to get the process done. But it's kind of conventional wisdom is that the 2023 Farm Bill starts the conversation, the big picture debate, the big kind of laying out of big ideas. That starts in January. That starts in 2021. You're going to see a lot of bills introduced solely for the purpose of kind of being in the discussion as the wheels start to turn and thinking about the next Farm Bill. And I think for organic, we need to be in there as well. So how do we fix this cost share program so it doesn't keep happening, that they can't do the math and we run out of money? That could be a Farm Bill fix. What do we want on climate? What do we want on bigger picture support for organic? Those could be Farm Bill conversations. And so don't be surprised if you start hearing about that, even though it seems like we're still doing the last one, which we are. And then again, as always, when we are stuck on something about USDA, we tend to try to use Congress for whatever leverage we can to get USDA moving through that appropriations process, through the Agriculture Committee having a hearing or writing a letter. But no matter who's running the USDA, we are always going to have to do that. So that's something that's kind of always on our list for OFA, and in particular OFA members, to educate their members of Congress about what it means to be organic, what programs you use, and whether the programs are working or not. So that kind of takes us to the end of what I wanted to do as a presentation, and then we can have some discussion, which is a huge piece of how we do this as OFA is we try to connect certified organic farmers with people in the government who are setting these rules or could help us make the rules better. So it's a little too soon to come back to Washington for a lobby day. We were one of the last in mid-March, we had our OFA fly-in, and we got it in just under the wire, like 2 days before they shut down the Capitol because of COVID. And you're still not doing lobby days in DC. It's not yet time for people to come back, and you actually can't get in the Capitol as a visitor. So our 2021 lobby day is going to be virtual, and it's going to be days just to give us some more wiggle room about how we set it up. So we're going to follow up with an email about how you sign up, and you'll hear from us about how to get involved. But just to kind of put it on your radar, we are really going to encourage people to register in advance so we know who we're dealing with, so we can set up good teams, because the logistics are different when we do it virtually. For those who've never done it before, who are on the fence about maybe I'm going to do it, maybe I don't, I want to learn more, we're going to do 2 different times, kind of like Advocacy 101, like what does it mean to do one of these lobby days? What does it entail? I'm not a lobbyist. How do I do it? And then for folks who do sign up, who want to do it, we're going to have kind of our kickoff preparatory briefing. What are we talking about? What are the materials? What's the status? What do we need to worry about to get ready? And then basically, instead of one day where we all go on the Hill on the same day, which is what we would do in normal times, we're basically going to get people to set up either phone or Zoom or whatever technology works meetings during 3 or 4 days during 1 week, just to give people more flexibility. And then at the end of the week on the Friday, we'll kind of get back together on a Zoom and recap how it went. So instead of one lobby day, we're going to have virtual advocacy week to not miss out, because we still need to have that contact. We can't take a year off. We have too much to do, so we adapt. And we'll be in touch more with folks about how you get on the team to do this, because we really need to keep it going. And so this is just contact info. I think lots of you know how to reach us, but in case you don't, You can get all this at the website. We're, in all the places you can find us. And Kate and I are always happy to talk to people about specific policy questions or ideas or other things we can do. So I may turn off this screen share and just see if people have some questions or ideas, or I heard a rumor about who might be the deputy interim acting secretary of whatever. Let's see. Let's see what people want to talk about for a couple more minutes.
Thank you, Patty. This is Kate. Just a reminder to folks that participants are muted for the webinar, but you can enter your questions into the Q&A. And I have a question just to get us started, Patty. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you think. You mentioned climate change, but especially knowing that Vilsack has been the Secretary of Agriculture before, what do you think he might do right away on organic issues?
Yeah, that's going to be super interesting, right? So some of the things that are on our short-term to-do list, right, especially the OLPP, the animal welfare standards, the origin of livestock issue. I mean, these have been on our to-do list since he was the Secretary of Agriculture, and especially that OLPP, that animal welfare rule, was written by his folks and it just didn't get finished, right? And then the Trump administration rolled it back. So I think lots of us, in DC are hopeful that we can make that case really early and be like, you almost got this across the finish line. Let's finish it off, right? They got to untangle things. There's some legal complications. There's some steps they're going to have to take, but we would love to see, and we're going to press to see really early a commitment that that's on their short-term list of problems to solve, because it's a very solvable problem and they were on the right track when he was there. And I think to be brutally frank, one of the reasons it seems like the Biden team chose Vilsack, and I listened to kind of their big announcement to the agriculture community on Friday. In a 10-minute conversation, I think they said he's ready to go on day one about 400 times. They are really emphasizing that he knows the agency, and they are really seem to be prioritizing he can come in and assess what did or didn't happen, who's got enough staff, who doesn't have enough staff, essentially what damage was done in the previous, in the current administration. And they seem to really be pushing that, him as a manager who knows the programs. So I think for organic, we have to make sure that things that are partially done, that we got partially done during the current administration, don't get put on pause just because the current administration did them. So that's that strengthening organic enforcement rule. We don't want to see that get put on pause because it was started by the Trump administration. So we're really going to be flagging that to keep that moving. We needed that done long ago. We need to keep it moving. And then on these livestock issues, really saying these are quick things you can do to kind of right the ship. Like, we need these back and we need them finished soon.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We do have a question from Harriet. She says, climate change seems to be a Biden priority. How can we leverage this for organic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a conversation we're all going to be having a lot immediately from now into next year. So I think if you are tuned in enough to get on this call, you have lots of thoughts, right, about how organic practices, one of the many benefits is, on the climate front, right? We know there's multiple benefits. So I think that we need to really be thinking all the time about saying that out loud so that we don't get accidentally left off the list of what is being promoted as climate friendly practices. The great debate I think we're going to see next year is what is the best driver of changing what's happening on the ground in agriculture. So there's going to be a lot of debate over, do you do it through, voluntary incentives? Is it a payment for the practice that you do? Is it a payment for some calculation of how much carbon you're sequestering because of what you do? And there's a lot of debate about the appropriateness of paying for that carbon. There's a lot of debate about the logistics of paying for that carbon. Do we actually have a good way to measure it? So there's that kind of big picture debate that's going to be going on in either of those scenarios. Like, if one of those approaches wins, we need to make sure it's going to work for folks who are certified organic, we need to be in the mix, right? So really getting in there and saying, if you're going to pay people for practices, like organic could be a great starting point. We already have a set of standards. We already know how to inspect, and we have all this rigor and all this structure to say like people are doing what they say they're doing. If you're talking about how you design a market-based program that pays people for the carbon they're supposed to be sequestering, then we have to have a real conversation about what if you've been doing these practices for 20 years and you were an early adopter? How do you not get left out if we start paying people based on, you know, improvement from today? So like there's going to, whatever road we end up going down, like organic's going to have to be in there to make sure that it works for our folks. And then there's a huge amount of research that needs to be done just to kind of prove what we all think, right? We know about the multiple benefits, but there's a lot of more research that could be done about organic techniques and what we actually know from a climate front.
Great, thanks, Patty. There was a follow-up question I think you covered. Can we get funding for organic farmers to reward them from what they're already doing within the climate policies?
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, I mean, I think I touched on that. I think that's going to be a hot topic. And so it's all in the design, right? The answer is maybe. Depends how the programs are designed. So if it's about, we draw a line on a date, and from that point forward, using this model, you get paid on how much carbon you've probably sequestered. You got to use the right model that knows about what organic practices are. We need to figure out this, you know, quote unquote, early adopter problem. If you sequestered your carbon a long time ago, but you're not showing year-to-year gains now, how do you do that fairly? Like there's a lot to figure out if we go down that road of kind of a market-based payment for carbon. And there's a lot to figure out if it's about practices, right? You can write a program that is skewed in any number of different ways. So kind of whichever path is taken, we're going to have to be in there explaining, you know, how organic works and making sure that it is a fair treatment, the stuff that we know that organic farmers do.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question. There were lots of disappointments during the former Vilsack term from continued loss of family farms, continued consolidation and loss of market choices, to continued minority farmer damage. Is there an effort to get together with other organizations such as Family Farm Defenders to note those many Vilsack rain deficits and put pressure to have a different vision this time that puts family and minority farmers as a priority rather than agribusiness and continued farm consolidation?
Yeah, that is the question of the day, right? Like you know, officially, obviously, we're going to work with who's running the USDA next year because that's our job and that's the reality. So we're going to deal with it. But yes, we don't have amnesia about what it was like to work on agriculture policy after having watched Vilsack do it for 8 years. And I think there's a lot of people who are disappointed. It seems like that disappointment actually caught the Biden team off guard a little bit. It's been very interesting, kind of the scuttlebutt behind the scenes. And I think that actually creates some openings to figure out, I don't think they're going to back down and say, oops, we made a mistake, we're not going to choose him. I'm not predicting that, but I think it creates a little bit of space for maybe a more interesting discussion about who gets those other jobs, right? Who is number 2, who is, you know, the undersecretary level. Like maybe I'm hopeful that the blowback they have experienced maybe opens their minds a little bit and they get more creative about who gets these other jobs. I know there are lots of convenings and lots of conversations happening where people are trying to put in lists of like more diverse, not just your typical, you know, kind of regular list of commodity association people that tend to get these jobs. So, you know, we'll happily talk to people about those lists and like how to make sure that we're putting good people in. And if people have ideas, now's the time to encourage people to put themselves in. There's a lot of different convenings where this space is happening. You know, Rural Coalition seems to be kind of compiling a list. There's several different kind of civil rights focused groups and Black farmer associations that are putting names in, and people can put themselves in. If you go to the Biden transition team website, which is, I think it's buildbackbetter.gov. You just do Biden transition, it's buildbackbetter.something, I think, gov. And they have a button where you can apply and you can say, I want to join this team. And so we need people at those kind of high profile level jobs, but there's a lot of other jobs beneath that maybe aren't super public, but we need good people in all of them who come from somewhere besides like the same old commodity association type things that USDA unfortunately is known for relying on. And I think you all, if wherever you're based, if you see people, see groups advocating on this, I think the organic perspective would be a welcome addition to that. And you also, if they get done their work the next couple of weeks and deal with pandemic response and keeping the government funded, at some point, Congress is going to take a holiday break. Things are a little weird now. We're not doing live events, but if you have contact with your members of Congress in the next, 6 weeks to 8 weeks, you can talk to them about this stuff too, and talk to them about, Vilsack's going to need to be confirmed. What questions are you going to ask him in the Senate, in the Ag Committee? If you have a senator who's on that committee, what are we going to ask him to put him on the record about how he's going to do on all of these important issues? And, these offices can weigh in too about who should get these other jobs. So I think don't forget about Congress in this process, and feel free to join in. I think it's important for organic folks to join in this conversation about who else should get these other jobs.
Patty, when the Trump administration started, it took a very long time for the USDA positions to be filled. Do you have a sense of when we will know who is being given the USDA jobs, especially the ones important to organic?
I could make one up. No, is the answer, right? Everything's a little kooky this year just because there's a few distractions going on with the way the election wound down and dealing with COVID and things like that. Vilsack will have input into who gets these jobs, right? So they're probably starting that conversation. I will say the pace of like the rumor mill and how it all goes on, in DC, and all of the chitter chatter picked up a lot in the last 3 or 4 days. So it does feel like that conversation is starting. I'm not making predictions yet about how fast the Senate is going to confirm him. I think we just don't know yet because we're not even sure who's running the Senate. So that's kind of step one is, where is Vilsack in the queue of getting these choices confirmed? The scuttlebutt is he will not have a hard time, unlike some other choices the Biden administration has made that might have a harder time in a really closely divided Senate. Like nobody is yet saying, oh, he's going to have a problem. So maybe that will happen on the quicker side. And then it's just a question of, whether they can settle and have all of the political conversations they're going to have about who gets these top jobs. Sometimes it takes a while to get that next tier of people, the deputy secretary, the undersecretary of all the different undersecretary jobs. Sometimes it takes a while to get those folks through because there's just a lot the Senate has to do to confirm all these people. But I don't anticipate a stalemate on Vilsack like there might be in some other cabinet officials. So that's not an answer because we don't know yet. It's just we're going to have to see. I mean, in the Trump transition, we didn't even get a nominee until January. So they're ahead of that schedule. That's what we know.
Thank you. So I'll put out a last call for questions to the Q&A down below. Just give folks a minute to submit one if you'd like to, and if not, we'll go ahead and wrap it up.
Yeah, and I'll make one last pitch for the lobby day. I'm looking at our list here. Quite a few of you have done it, so you're pros. It really is enormously helpful for members of Congress to hear from you, right? They can hear from me, and I'll keep doing that. But it really does make a difference when it is an organic farmer coming in saying, folks in my area use this program and it would be better if we changed it this way. It's just an entirely different meeting. I just can't say that enough times. And doing our virtual advocacy days in March will be nice timing. We're going to need, how many answers did I just give that we're like, I don't know. A lot of that stuff's going to be sorted out in January into February. Who is the full roster of the various committees? Who are we dealing with? We'll get a lot of that sorted in January and February. And so by, mid-March, when we're getting organized to do this, it'll be a good time to come in and be like, okay, this is what you need to focus on.
Great. Well, thanks for the plug for the advocacy days. Go ahead and turn my video on. I don't see any additional questions, so I'll just close us up. I wanted to thank everyone who joined us today. Patty, really appreciate you sharing your time and your expertise with us, bringing us up to speed on what's happening next. Thanks for all the work you did to put together your presentation and answer our questions. The recording of this webinar will be available on our website, and we'll also try to send it out to you all who registered today. You can register for our upcoming virtual advocacy days on our website, on our events page, and then I also put the direct link to that in the chat. Again, that's March 22nd through the 25th, but we have a lot of support for that advocacy day before with an Advocacy 101 webinar, and then talking points and sort of walking you through what those meetings will look like. You're definitely not on your own when you do that. We are working as a team to make sure that organic farmers are well prepared and have a strong, consistent voice in Washington during that week. The advocacy days are open to all OFA members, so please spread the word. And just a reminder, if you haven't yet joined as a member, OFA is a membership organization. Our farmer members and our supporter members are extremely important to us. Our farmer members are the ones who have a vote on all of our policy priorities, and we're right in the middle of doing that policy development process right now. So we encourage you to all become a part of this national movement and to encourage your peers to do so as well. You can always find all the information on our website, organicfarmersassociation.org. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.